Excuse me. Hate to interrupt brunch after this stressful election, but I figured now's as good a time as any to start planning for the next one. Party planning, that is. I'll bring the fruit platter if you'll bring the drinks. So long as somebody brings a neutral chip. But seriously, I know this election cycle was rough, but on the bright side, there was some progress. Montana and South Dakota legalized weed, with taxes funding anything from schools to conservation efforts. Arizona voted to levy a tax on high-income earners to fund their schools. And Portland, Maine passed a robust rent control bill. Plus, polls from Fox News show a supermajority of citizens want some form of government-run healthcare and federal investment in renewable energy. Hooray! Glad we're coming around to a vaguely progressive brand of populism. Problem is, the party that at times supports these policies didn't do so hot, while Republicans, who largely oppose these policies people want, did pretty all right, at least considering they had, what's his name at the top of the ballot. The starkest example of this contrast comes from Florida, who voted to increase their minimum wage on a statewide level, but voted against Biden, who wants to increase the federal minimum wage. This tells me a few things. 1. If Republicans can win over some of the working class by feigning an aura of populism while directly opposing the policies workers want, they must be some fierce communicators. 2. To butcher an Alex Perrine quote, it seems like the most popular Democrat in 2020 is a faceless progressive ballot initiative, especially in a state like Florida or Montana. And 3. As Anand Girahara said on Yang Speaks,
to put it very simply, have a feeling, a fear, the Democrats don't know how to talk.
As a mere outside observer who'd love to see these policies get passed, it seems the folks offering them need to get better at selling them. So today I'd like to explore how the left can get better at selling our ideas, with a slight emphasis on populist rhetoric, as it seems to be what voters respond to. To get to the bottom of this, I'll be looking at how Republicans managed to sell populism better, how Democrats have failed to sell populism so far, and how the left can sell populism better than the GOP. Without further ado, let's go. Part 1. Where Republicans have succeeded. First off, and most importantly, Republicans have got rhetoric down to a science. A little phrase here, a little euphemism there, and they're able to signal complex ideas to a variety of groups. Like, think about the phrase family values for a sec. What does it literally mean? Families come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. How can there be a single, shared set of family values? Well, you see, that's because it's not meant to describe a universal set of values, but those of a specific demo. After years of refining Republican messaging, family values has become a stand-in for a value set held in generally Christian, generally patriarchal households. But at the same time, the phrase refers to no specific policy. If a Republican says they'll protect family values, does that mean they'll stop trans people from going into their desired bathroom? Stop sex ed from being taught in your kid's classroom? Stop tax hikes? The beauty of the refined rhetoric is it can mean all of those things and more, because its goal is to make a specific demographic feel seen while also being vague enough for individual citizens to fill in the blanks with whatever policy they care most about. And this rhetorical prowess is clearly effective at turning out a consistent base of evangelical support. Another one of their strengths, they're aggressive politically. They come out swinging on most topics, putting a lot of energy into setting the narrative up front. A recent example, not long after word came out that Biden was considering relieving some student loan debt, conservatives were hard at work trying to set the narrative as a moment of the poor paying out the rich, which is pretty misleading. Obviously, those with massive student debt aren't rich, otherwise they wouldn't be in debt. But the fact that Republicans are already getting out in front of it before Biden's even properly started his transition shows an aggressive approach that is clearly successful. I think that's why Trump ended up in the White House and proved to be a pretty effective Republican president, because he's a fierce politician.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
Next, Republicans are able to frame most issues citizens encounter as a wider part of their war against big government. And sometimes they really gotta stretch the truth to make it make sense, like when discussing free trade of the 90s. A bunch of companies took manufacturing jobs overseas, and lots of Americans lost work. So who's at fault here? Well, it is the corporations who valued profit over the well-being of US citizens, so it's kinda on them, right? Well, despite the GOP being the overwhelming supporters of free trade until recently, Trump made it a winning message to go against free trade. And how did he turn it into a winning message? By directing blame for the harm free trade caused on the politicians that let it happen, he was able to frame a symptom of deregulation as a wider part of his anti-big government message, which is pretty contradictory on its face. Protectionism by nature is an increase in government as an expansion of the regulatory state, whereas free trade decreased the role of the state, as in they put up less barriers to the worldwide free market. The fact that he was able to spin this topic how he did is an astonishing level of rhetorical prowess, but it just goes to show the lengths Republicans will go to make everything about government bad. Next, Republicans are good at tapping into Americana. Think about how much their resistance to taxes is likened to the American Revolution. The Revolution wasn't about hating taxes, it was about hating a system that didn't give folks democratic control over their lives. Yet Republicans, appealing to a sense of national identity, liken the two in order to rile up opposition to tax hikes. Lastly, although this segment of Hannity pretending to eat a hot dog under his mask makes me chuckle, it speaks to a relatable approach that is clearly successful on Fox News.
And I'll even bet if it means, okay, you want to go to the game, you got to put on a mask. It's not ideal. You can't eat popcorn, but you could probably go like this and take a bite of your hot dog and chew it with your mask on, and then take a straw and drink your beer. Probably do it that way. I would rather do that than stay home myself. That's the Hannity plan.
The story of downing a glizzy under one's mask is an attempt to relate a political outcome Hannity wants through a shared experience, micro-targeted to the perceived language of his audience. And mock it as I may, it's rhetorically effective. It communicates a relatively complicated idea, how our country should navigate a pandemic while maintaining the rituals we hold dear, through a shared experience that makes its middle American audience feel seen. The ritual, of course, being the beloved experience of devouring a greasy hot dog while you watch from the cheapsies as your home team gets crushed by those damn Yankees! While summarized, I hope that this gives a solid enough understanding of some of the ways Republicans are good at messaging and, more specifically, signaling populism. They're great at narrative building, rhetorically they're on point, they bring the fight to you instead of playing defense, and they know how to tap into the American id. Now, let's get into how Democrats have failed. Part 2, where Democrats have failed. First, and perhaps most damning, Democrats don't seem so interested in selling ideas, just in having them there to placate their base. Now that might sound like an oxymoron, but hear me out. Joe Biden's platform included a federal $15 minimum wage, yet it wasn't mentioned in much campaign material. Why? It could be he had bad polling data that told him folks weren't vibing with a minimum wage increase, or it could be that the $15 minimum wage wasn't on his platform to win over independents, but was more so just a policy he put out there to turn out the progressive vote. Having never been in his war room, it's hard for me to know for sure. But given how rarely he talked about some of the bolder parts of his platform, it seems like he, and Democrats generally, don't actually want to put in the work to sell these policies to new voters. They just want to turn out their base. And why are they afraid of selling these policies? It seems a lot of Democrats are used to playing defense, and I don't know if they know how to play offense anymore. Rather than refine their messaging skills or get better at controlling the narrative, they just seem to avoid any policies that aren't safe. We saw this with the minimum wage. A lot of folks want to update it, evidenced by all the states and cities that have increased theirs. But it seems Democrats are worried to really push that policy, maybe because they're scared of being called small business killers or whatever. And this propensity to avoid tough policies is a horrible strategy. As evidenced by the ballot measures I cited earlier, you could win over independents with a bolder platform, but that'd be too hard, so instead they just wave the white flag and complain that progressives are really mean. Not only are Democrats scared to push some policies, it seems for others they think they shouldn't have to. that their policy is so self-evidently good for so many people that it should really be obvious why they're right. Like when it comes to welfare-type policies, they seem to think all they really have to say is, "But think of the poors," and that'll be enough to combat Republican critiques. Again, Republicans come out swinging, so you need to have some defenses and counterattacks ready, which they sometimes appear to struggle to deploy or don't think they should have to use. Next, Democrats have been drifting away from messages that focus on material benefits. Over time, they've centered their campaigns on the language and desires of upper middle class, college-educated folks, leading to a lot of useless platitudes about how important it is to be nice. Biden's main campaign message was restoring the soul of the nation, and that's fine, but how does a nation with a restored soul help me pay my bills, you know? Those platitudes mostly work on folks who are well off, but you need to send a clear message to those in dire straits. Make America Great Again immediately tells someone struggling with mortgage payments that they can expect prosperity. And since more of the country's struggling than well off, it seems important to center your campaign's message on how you'll help folks out. Lastly, Democrats have in recent years proven horrible at setting the narrative. The proceedings of ACB are the clearest example. Public support was initially on the side of waiting till after the election, but between really the only message Democrats presented being, "You Republican hypocrites," and fucking Feinstein praising her, public support eventually got behind her nomination. It'd be another thing if the public was always in favor of her nomination, but the fact that Democrats had public support and then lost it shows an inability to properly set a narrative. You could probably fill a book with the reasons why Democrats fail at messaging, but these strike me as a few of the noteworthy ones. And while it's important to understand how we got here, pointing fingers can only get us so far. Let's talk about how we move forward. Part 3. How we can do better. For starters, let's try framing our policies using the language of American values. One example given on Yang Speaks is to use the language of religiosity when discussing employer-based healthcare.
By the way, sacredness, can I just say one thing on sacredness? Another thing, our current healthcare system turns your employer into God. You want to talk to Christians? You're in an employer-based healthcare system, your employer is playing a role in your life that only God should actually play, which is deciding whether you live or die.
Targeting the message to the language of Christians could be a really effective way to win folks over, and it's an easy approach to replicate. Take an American value like liberty or freedom or religiosity and find where our policies fit. Easy peasy. Let's see another example. Y'all like freedoms, right? Of course you do. Self-determination is super cummy. And you know a progressive policy that we could pitch as scientifically increasing levels of freedoms? Medicare for all. With employer-based healthcare, you're restricted from full range of motion because if you quit your job, you'll leave your health coverage behind. You know who that kills? Aspiring entrepreneurs and small business owners who are just trying to build from the ground up. It's also possible that with employer-based healthcare, workers will find themselves facing perverse incentives where a dead-end job they might hate has okay insurance, but a better job opportunity lacks insurance or has a plan that doesn't cover their needs. The current system then would be pitting their need to not be bankrupted by medical debt against most of their other basic needs. Medicare for All, however, would give Americans the freedom to pursue whatever career they'd like without fear of losing healthcare. Do you really want to get in the way of Americans having freedom? The same can be said of making college free for students. The high costs keep many folks from ever considering college, and those who attend are riddled with such high student debt, they're often coerced into shitty financial situations. You also have people from places of generational poverty whose only means of affording college is to potentially sell their bodies and mental health stability in service of the armed forces. Making college free, though, empowers self-determination. Want to attend school without having to take a shitty job once you graduate? Don't worry, you're free to navigate the job market without being coerced by massive debt. Want to focus on school and not have to work 30 hours a week during your time there to survive? Don't worry, you're free to focus on your education because your costs will be diminished. Want to have access to a world-class education without the danger that comes with joining the armed forces? Don't worry, you're free to get an education without risking your health. If made explicitly clear, these policies could absolutely win over independent voters by tapping into that core American value of lovin' my freedoms. Another piece of Americana that progressives need to tap into: reverence for social mobility. The US adores social mobility so much, it has its own story category, rags to riches stories. So with that cultural love affair going on, it'd be useful to point out that dozens of other countries are better at empowering social mobility than the US. The US doesn't even crack the top 25 in the World Economic Forum's 2020 Global Social Mobility Index, while the countries that top the list are Nordic and/or in the EU. Why's that? Because it turns out various social safety nets empower people to break out of poverty much more easily. If you want to pass similar policies here in the US, be sure to tap into this American value. An element of Americana that could really use tapping into: America's history of leading the world in technological advances. Conservatives have long denied climate change, though these days their main complaint is, "Yeah, I don't know, everyone's saying a lot really fast and it's confusing, so I guess that means their plans are all unrealistic." You know what would shut their asses up? Talk about how they're holding us back. Point out that renewable energy is inevitable. Why not get out in front of it like the trailblazing Americans that we are, and lead the world in this new technology? To fight investing in a renewable infrastructure means that we'll be behind the rest of the world and we'll have to buy expensive machines from other countries in the coming decades, costing the taxpayer in the long run. When discussing a renewable energy proposal, make sure the American people know that every Republican who votes against it is trying to keep us in the fucking Stone Age. Next, get folks with New York or Boston accents to pitch policy. I'm dead serious. It's no coincidence that some of Fox's most popular hosts have thick New York accents. Since the media trains people to use that generic TV host accent, the presence of a regional accent comes off as authentic. Plus, it's amazing how much those accents present an aura of blue-collar-ness.
This $1,200 thing isn't doing shit for the normal working family. You want to help? Here's one idea. Tell the fucking banks and mortgage companies to stop all mortgage payments at this time. Just stop them. And don't give me that 3-month furlough bullshit. How does that even make sense?
See? We don't even know this guy's platform and he's already won 400 electoral votes. Or take this Ed Markey ad.
My father was a union leader. He taught me, don't beg for your rights, organize and take them.
Does that guy sound like a senator or a construction worker? There's something about that sweet I'm walking here accent that just hit different though. Lastly, let's not concede the field of community-oriented values or small government. Many proposals in the realm of police reform are about community control, like community review boards, which put some of the power in the hands of the citizens being policed. And same goes for rent control boards, which act as a community check on property developers. Make sure to highlight the localized people power these ideas uplift, and stress that these policies don't involve government. So that about covers all the tips that come to mind at time of recording. If you have any other ideas, which I'm sure a lot of y'all do, be sure to drop some of them in the comments down below. But before the curtain closes, let's wrap up. Part 4. Conclusion. Whether it's phone banging for a presidential candidate, handing out flyers for a county treasurer, or talking with your grandma in Facebook comment sections, I hope these ideas help folks find new ways to discuss policy so as to bring folks into the progressive coalition. And to, most importantly, make sure the average voter knows we've got the policies they want on our platform. Because with our ever-changing political climate, I think these ways of pitching policies are becoming very important very quickly. I'm starting to get a little frightened for what comes after Trump. And if progressives and the left want to beat whichever less rude mini-Trump the GOP throws out, and whichever corporate stooge the Dems put forward in 2024, that victory is going to rely on our ability to prove that we've got an activated and committed coalition of voters. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like the video, be sure to toss me one of them likes and subscribe down below, ringing that little bell so you can know the exact nanosecond I release my next video. After a recent surge of subscribers, I started a Patreon. Be sure to become a patron if you'd like to support me as I churn out content. Links in the description. Thanks much, and I'll see you next time.